So, first of all, one thing I'd like to clarify, the tragic conflict in Lear is not between King Lear on the one hand and Goneril and Regan on the other. That's a clear-cut conflict between good and evil. It would produce melodrama, and indeed there's something quite melodramatic about the conflict between Lear and his two evil daughters. The tragic conflict in Lear is between Lear and Cordelia. That is a conflict in which there is good on both sides. Lear is standing up for the principle of political life. Cordelia is standing up for the principles of truth and genuine love. That's why it's important to see that Lear does have a feasible plan for dividing the kingdom at the beginning of the play. He's not just indulging himself in professions of love from his daughters. He's in fact trying to do something genuinely good to pass the kingdom on in the best possible fashion to Cordelia. So the play really does fit Hegel's theory of tragedy as the conflict of two goods. I'll remind you of our old friend McMorris from Henry V. I would have blowed up the town, so Christ save me. McMorris is no philosopher. He's never thought much about his life. He's never thought that there might be a conflict between his pagan fierceness as an Irishman and his Christian faith. What Shakespeare does for us is expose those contradictions in our inner beliefs and our values. We don't think them through. We would like everything to fit neatly together. We'd like to have it all. We'd like to think that political excellence and other forms of human excellence are simply compatible. But Shakespeare shows there can often be a tension and a tragic tension between them. Another point that someone brought up after class last time, Lear says, let them anatomize Regan. Not good medical procedure in Elizabethan times. If you consider the conditions in an Elizabethan hospital, anatomizing was a sentence of death. And it's an interesting thing to think about. Yes, Lear would like to anatomize Regan to see what breeds about these hard hearts. It is the question that troubles him the most. But he would have to take her apart to find out what makes her tick. And that's a problem. In effect, he's thinking of her as a machine. Machine can be taken apart and put back together, and that's fine. But she's an organism, and if you take her apart, even if you're Dr. Frankenstein, you may not be able to put her back together in a functioning way. Now, the reason I bring that up is because Shakespeare goes further. In King Lear, he anatomizes society. To see what makes it tick. He takes it apart. You could say that he atomizes society. He reduces it to its barest essentials, to its constituent parts. This is remarkable because in this, Shakespeare anticipates Thomas Hobbes and the foundations of modern liberalism. The idea that to understand society, you reduce it to its constituent parts, and that means the individuals. No longer do we have the idea of Plato and Aristotle that the city forms the basic unit of political analysis. No, from Hobbes on and modern political theory, the basic unit of analysis is society reduced to its component individuals. And then you try to reconstruct society from that. Get down to those basic units and then reform society. In Hobbes, it's done by a social contract. That means by something artificial. You take society apart and then you put it back together, supposedly in a better form, or in Hobbes's case, one that has a more solid foundation. Now, Shakespeare raises some doubts about that. If you ever deny human sociability, are you ever going to get a society back? Are you going to ever be able to put it back together once you take it apart? Again, Hobbes claims he can. He can have a war of all against all and then put things back together with a social contract. Shakespeare seems to deny that in King Lear. The sense here seems to be once you unleash this human egotism, once you unleash the individual and his desires, you're never going to get a social order back. What you will get is humanity must perforce prey upon itself like monsters of the deep. What you get is the egoism of Goneril, Regan, Edmund, and Cornwall. And it's very interesting that they cannot form a society. It's in a way fortunate that they cannot form a society. They are too egoistical. It's not just an accident that they don't triumph at the end of this play. Goneril and Regan are in this intense competition over Edmund, which leads Goneril to try to poison Regan, in fact, to poison Regan. Cornwall and Albany were almost at war by the second act in the play. If Cornwall had survived, he would have ended up fighting Albany. He would have ended up fighting Edmund if Goneril had killed Albany. As it is, Albany and Edmund are odds. In a way, it's the saving grace of this world that Shakespeare presents in King Lear, that the world rebels against this kind of evil. It is not natural. Now, Shakespeare does not present a world in which the good triumphs. This is not an optimistic play. It doesn't have a happy ending. It's not a simplistic view of the world in which good triumphs over evil. But it isn't the exact opposite either. It isn't a world in which evil triumphs. And that's very important, that by the end of the play, the best characters in this world are dead. King Lear, Cordelia, the Fool. But the worst characters, the most evil characters in the world are dead too. Cornwall, Regan, Goneril, and Edmund. And Albany expresses it best on it's page 100. So Act 4, Scene 2, about line 30, in this marvelous outburst against Goneril. Oh, Goneril, you are not worth the dust which the rude wind blows in your face. I fear your disposition. That nature, which contemns its origin, cannot be boarded certain in itself. She that herself will sliver and disbranch from her material sap, perforce must wither and come to deadly use. There's something about evil that is self-destructive and self-consuming, and it cannot reproduce. It is infertile. And notice there's no children in Goneril's family. Regan's family, Lear condemns. Goneril's organs have increased to infertility. It's almost a sociobiology point here, that the reason evil doesn't prevail in the world is it can't reproduce itself. It's so self-consuming and self-destructive, it destroys the family itself. It cannot produce issue. And that's very important in this world. So Shakespeare shows that once you reduce human beings to this kind of basic level, the level of the beast, you can't reconstitute society. Immanuel Kant, in his essay Perpetual Peace, made this famous statement: the problem of organizing a state, however hard it may seem, can be solved even for a race of devils if only they are intelligent. That's in a way one of the great statements of modern liberalism and its theory. And I think Shakespeare denies that here, that a race of Gonerils, Edmunds, Regans, and Cornwalls could not reproduce itself and therefore could not form a community. So again, this anatomy of society is very interesting. If you break down the social order, you release all these forces, and some of them are good. You allow love and philosophy, the search for truth, to flourish in ways that had hitherto been impossible. But you also release what's worst in humanity, and that's uncontrollable now, and must be purged. And the one hopeful sign in this play is that evil is purged in that way. Now, an interesting way of viewing this and understanding it, we've talked about the movement of clothing in the play, and if I have time, I'm going to return to it. But basically, we saw that we begin with people clothed, they're stripped to nakedness, the middle of the play, and then they must return to clothing at the end of the play to reform society. Now, one of our most important pieces of clothing in society is the gods. The gods clothe us from the wretchedness of our existence. And one thing we see in this play is the way people are stripped of their belief in the gods, and the way that belief must be reconstituted for the play to resolve in a new community. We see this in Lear. He begins the play thinking the gods are his best friends. He's on perfectly normal terms with them and can order them around to do what he wants. And as things fall apart going into Act 3, he says, let the great gods find out their enemies now. That turns out to be the last mention of the gods by Lear until Act 5, Scene 3. Throughout Acts 3 and 4, after that moment, Act 3, Scene 2, he does not mention the gods. And indeed, the shattering aspect of his experience is that it's made him lose his faith in the gods. He thought they were just. And when he sees injustice in the world, fundamental injustice, he ceases to believe in the gods by Act 3, Scene 4. Indeed, it is interesting. He remains terribly concerned with justice, as we saw. He puts Goneril and Regan on trial for the sake of justice. But he no longer invokes the gods in that scene, Act 3, Scene 4. I was checking for this. He constitutes a court, but no one takes an oath in the court. Another aspect of conventional courtroom procedure that's conspicuously absent in Lear's Act of Natural Justice in Act 3, Scene 4. No one has to say, do you swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God. Lear invokes justice in Act 3, Scene 4, but he does not invoke the gods anymore. And it's interesting that he's come to question the gods. When he asks his philosopher, what is the cause of thunder? He's asking that because the answer is no longer the gods. The traditional answer was, what's the cause of thunder? Zeus, the thunder bearer. And the thunder is there and the lightning is there to punish malefactors. Lear has to ask that question because he no longer believes in the gods. And as is typical in the play, this becomes general in the play. Lear's the central character, but the subordinate characters also begin to question the gods. These are very conventional people at the beginning of the play. They all believe in the gods and the justice of the gods, and that the gods underwrite justice. But look what happens to Gloucester. Page 96, so Act 4, Scene 1, about line 36. As flies to wanton boys are we to the gods. They kill us for their sport. Wow. Now again, that's one of the most famous passages in the play. Many people cite it as if this is somehow Shakespeare's view because it is expressed so powerfully. The problem is, though, you cannot have a society among people who believe this. As flies to wanton boys are we to the gods. They kill us for their sport. Gloucester has good reason to express this at this point. But it's truly problematic for society if you believe that the gods are not just indifferent to justice, but are in fact unjust and utterly malevolent. By the way, this is the view that Tom of Bedlam presents to Lear in Act 3. All that talk about the fiends. In the absence of speech about the gods in Act 3, Scene 4 and Act 3, Scene 6, we hear all this talk about fiends, as if the world was governed by devils. Something similar happens to Kent as a result of his experience. This is page 105 in the Signet, so Act 4, Scene 3, about line 32. having heard how badly Lear's been treated. Kent says, again, Act 4, Scene 3, about line 33, it is the stars above us govern our conditions, else oneself made and make could not beget such different issues. He's saying Cordelia and Goneril Regan could not be so different. After all, they come from the same parents, but they were born on different dates, so if you believe in astrology, they could be different. To say it is the stars that govern our conditions is to deny that it's the gods. It's to deny that in any sense the traditional gods govern us. It's something much more mechanical. And astrology comes up earlier in the play in the exchange between Gloucester and Edmund. And Gloucester, too, believes in astrology there. So one aspect of this dissolution of society that occurs in the middle of the play is a dissolution of religious belief. And especially the belief in the justice of the gods. So it is no accident that the counter movement in the play has to involve a reconstitution of religious belief. Just as people have to put their clothing back on, they have to put the gods back on. And Edgar is particularly aware of this. That's why he stages that almost comic business with Gloucester in Act 4, Scene 6. He realizes his father is in despair and has become suicidal, so he stages this miracle. He stages the resurrection of Gloucester. Gloucester thinks he's jumped off a cliff. Of course, he hasn't, so he is alive, and this is Act 4, Scene 6, about line 55. Edgar, still in disguise, says to him, "Thy life's a miracle." And then over on the next page, 113, line 73 in this scene, he tells Gloucester, "Think that the clearest gods who make them honors of men's impossibilities have preserved thee." His father not only wants to commit suicide, but actually has just attempted it. And the only way to get him back into society is to restore his faith in the gods. And Edgar will go to the point of staging miracles, staging resurrections, just to bring this apart. And in general, one thing we see in the play is how much the characters, the good characters, like Edgar, like Albany, clutch at any sign that there are gods and they support justice. Look at page 103. This is Act 4, Scene 2, about line 78. The minute Albany hears of how Cornwall's been killed by a servant, he says, "This shows you are above, you justicers, that these are nether crimes so speedily convenge." So, he takes this as evidence of belief in the gods and their willingness to avenge injustice. And this is quite an important pattern in the play. If you turn to page 139, this is Act 5, Scene 3, the act where the political community has to be reconstituted, as we'll see. So Act 5, Scene 3, line 171, when Edgar is explaining what's happened with his father, and says, again, this is line 172, "The gods are just, and of our pleasant vices make instruments to plague us. The dark and vicious place where thee he got cost him his eyes." He's saying to the bastard Edmund, that's an ugly statement. Many people have been repelled about it. Edgar appears to be saying, this was just. The gods are just, and our pleasant vices make us the dark and vicious place where he got cost him his eyes. As if it was as if Gloucester's blinding was a manifestation of divine justice. I find that thought repellent, and as I say, many people have, and yet you see Edgar, like Albany, grasping at straws here. This has been a shattering experience, this play. it has raised all sorts of questions about the God's justice. And so they're now grasping at any sign, any interpretation that can make this seem just. So that page 141, still Act 5, Scene 3, about line 234, 233, when the bodies of Goneril and Regan are ordered, Albany says, "This judgment of the heavens that makes us tremble touches us not with pity." Now again, he insists on calling this the judgment of the heavens. And finally, on page 144, Albany tries to bring an edifying conclusion to it all. So that's Act 5, Scene 3, about line 304. "All friends shall taste the wages of their virtue, and all foes the cup of their deservings." As if we've got a morally perfect ending here, where the evil will be punished and the good will be rewarded. And I think Shakespeare's showing us something here, because this is a rather forced pattern here. These people are overstating their case, if I may say so. But he's showing if society is to be reconstituted, people do need some kind of faith like this in the justice of the world. Now, lest we start to think that Shakespeare himself views the world this way, go to page 142. So Act 5, Scene 3, about line 258. This is when, in all the excitement, they've forgotten about Cordelia, and Albany says, line 258, "The gods' defender, bear him hence a while." And then in one of the most savage stage directions in all of literature, Shakespeare writes, "Enter Lear with Cordelia in his arms." The gods' defender, enter Lear with Cordelia dead in his arms. It shows that Shakespeare does not share this view of a simple moral calculus in the world, that the gods simply defend human beings and justice if Cordelia shows up dead at that moment of Albany invoking the gods. Still, would like to call your attention to the theology of this play, much as I did with A Midsummer Night's Dream, and I think it's very similar. That is, Shakespeare presents us in this world in this play with a world that is not simply just and not simply unjust. There's this sort of rough order that we saw in A Midsummer Night's Dream in the cosmos. The world is not perfectly ordered. Cordelia dies, the fool dies, Lear dies, good people die, Gloucester loses his eyes, not morally, not justly, as Edgar implies. There's awful things happen in the world. The gods do not appear to provide us with a perfectly providential world in which good prospers and evil suffers. On the other hand, we're not in the world of the foul fiend Flibbertigibbet, as Tom of Bedlam keeps insisting. Again, the world is not perfectly ordered, as we saw in a world governed by Oberon and Titania, but the world is not perfectly disordered either. A world of perfect injustice would be a world in which Regan, Cornwall, Edmund, and Goneril were alive at the end of the play and rewarded. It's as if the world vomits them up. It can't swallow them. The great British critic A.C. Bradley wrote a book called Shakespearean Tragedy, still one of the best books on Shakespeare, made this point about the play, that whatever else you say about this world, evil cannot sustain itself in it. So again, I would offer a kind of rough pagan theology in the work, a kind of Homeric theology, so similar to what happens in Homer. Just when you think the gods are on our side, everything's going well, a young, handsome hero is struck down for no reason, and you start to question the justice of the gods. But just when you're about to give up on them, just when you're going to doubt there's any order, something works out morally or justly in the world. Cornwall goes too far and a peasant stands up and kills him. Again, this is a world in which disorder is the product of a storm at the center of the play. The idea isn't that human life is perennially stormy. The storm is still a kind of interlude. It's very powerful in this play and very disruptive and very disordering, but still the sense is nature is basically ordered, so much so that it ultimately rejects evil in its purest and most naked forms. I think that's important in understanding the whole of the play. Again, so many people focus on parts of this play and don't try to understand the whole. They focus on, as flies are we to the gods, flies to wanton boys are we to the gods, they kill us for their sport. That's a moment in the thinking in this play, but it's ultimately viewed as something people have to get over, even though there's a certain deep truth in it. Okay, let me return now to the story of King Lear. We've in effect been looking at the problem of the philosopher king in this play, and it's certainly what we will return to on Thursday in The Tempest. Let me read the famous passage about philosopher kings, or philosophy and kingship, from Plato's Republic. This is Socrates speaking. Unless, I said, the philosophers rule as kings, or those now called kings and chiefs, genuinely and adequately philosophize, and political power and philosophy coincide in the same place, while the many natures now making their way to either apart from the other or by necessity excluded, there is no rest from ills for the cities, my dear Glaucon, nor, I think, for humankind, nor will the regime we have described in speech ever come forth from nature insofar as possible and see the light of the sun. So this is the great problem as Socrates presents it in the Republic, Plato's dialogue about justice, that philosophy and kingship do not coincide. And somehow we might have to hope that they will be brought together. And that's what I've been showing you in King Lear, this disjunction between wisdom and power. That's the great tragic fact in King Lear. When Lear is in power, he's cut off from the very kind of knowledge that he needs in order to rule. But now in the second half of the play, we're going to see something even more disturbing. And that is that once Lear achieves these truths, once he has glimpses into the problem of justice, all these things he didn't do while he was king, it's going to unfit him for the kingship. And in two senses, the way he views these truths will make him disinclined to rule. It makes him indifferent to justice. Going into Act 3, he is still obsessed with justice. So much so that he abandons the gods because they don't seem to support justice. He stops speaking about them after they've failed to support him and support what he sees as the just order. In Act 3, Scene 6, he is still questing for justice. He holds this trial of Goneril and Regan, but no oaths in court, no invocation of the gods, precisely because they don't seem to be concerned about justice. But in Act 3, Lear is still concerned with justice. In Act 4, he will cease to be concerned with justice because he doesn't believe in it anymore. So there's a cognitive aspect to this. What he learns makes him disinclined to rule, but it goes even deeper than that. We saw that his nature stood in his way of philosophy, that this anger in him, this noble anger, made him unresponsive to people who try to tell him the truth. And his soul has to be stripped down before he's open to truth. But once he is, he loses his commanding nature. That the Lear we see in Act 4 is no longer capable of ruling because he no longer has that noble anger that made him such an impressive figure. So let's look at Act 4. Two scenes that are key here are Act 4, Scene 6, and Scene 7. Again, we get this kind of juxtaposition and double vision in Lear. In Scene 6, he again sees human beings as animals, and he reduces them to the lowest possible level, the level of their bodies. and that leads him to believe that a just order is impossible. He acts as if that's the universal truth about humanity. And yet in scene 7, he's going to be reunited with Cordelia, and she's going to be his spirit. And he's going to look up to her as this beautiful example of humanity. In scene 6, he forgets Cordelia. In scene 7, he forgets Goneril and Regan. He cannot hold it together. Remember in Act 3, Scene 4, at first he saw Tom of Bedlam as the bare-forked animal, but then he saw him as the philosopher. But he couldn't see them as both at once. What opens up in this chaos of Act 3 is what's best and worst in humanity, what's highest and lowest, the philosopher versus the bare-forked animal. Lear cannot come up with an account that takes into account both what's highest and lowest in human nature. Let me say that Shakespeare does. Shakespeare offers us King Lear, which shows us the two visions, which shows us the two sides. What Lear is incapable of, Shakespeare, the playwright, is capable of, and the same thing happens in Act 4 with the juxtaposition of Scene 6 and 7. In Scene 6, Lear sees man as all body, as all animal. In Scene 7, he sees man, and in this case Cordelia, detached from the body as a kind of spirit. What he cannot do is come up with an account of human being that takes into account our composite nature, that we are part spirit and part body, that we are animal, but something that transcends animal. Remember, this is what we saw about love in the comedies. That people tended to err on one extreme side or the other. For Sylvius and Phoebe, love was all poetry and spirit. For Touchstone and Audrey, love was all body and prose. What Orlando and Rosalind had to do was somehow find a way of uniting body and spirit in love, realizing that love has this spiritual component and also this physical component, that love is something we share with the animals. It involves a rutting season. It involves something you do in the fields and in the forest. But on the other hand, we're human beings. We have language. We have poetry. We can make something higher out of love. That lesson in the comedies that we are composite beings, that we're body and spirit, I think carries over into King Lear as one of the reasons for its depth. Let's turn now to Scene 6 and see what happens to Lear in his full madness here. And this would be let's start page 114, so Act 4, Scene 6, about line 110. When I do stare, see how the subject quakes. I pardon that man's life. What was thy cause? Adultery? Thou shalt not die. Die for adultery? No. The wren goes to it, and the small gilded fly does lecher in my sight. Lear invokes the standard of animals here. And animals have no adultery. How can you speak of adultery among animals? If you see love as pure sex, as rutting, then there's no reason to punish someone for adultery because the wren does it, the small gilded fly does it. Let copulation thrive. It's the sort of thing that Touchstone says, and As You Like It. For Gloucester's bastard son was kinder to his father than my daughters got twixt the lawful sheets. Now, once again, I point to the obvious error here. Lear sounded so profound in Act 3, Scene 4 with his "Is man no more than this" speech. But in fact, the obvious answer was man is more than this. Edgar's nakedness, which Lear takes as the essence of humanity there, was in fact a disguise. Edgar took off clothing to produce Tom of Bedlam, and Lear was wrong about that figure, and this is particularly wrong here to say that Gloucester's bastard son was kinder to his father than my daughters got. And he's saying this in front of Gloucester and Edgar, as it turns out. If you want to bring it home here, how wrong this is. Lear is mistaken about it. Lear is standing up for bastards, just the way Edmund did. And what we, and again, there's a certain truth to this. There's a lot of sexual malfeasance going on in the world, even in this world. But Lear is missing something here, as shown by this simple mistake. And indeed, it's the same mistake that Edmund makes. If you don't have a definition of adultery, you don't have a definition of marriage. If you don't have a definition of bastardry, of illegitimacy, you don't have a definition of marriage and of the family. We are not animals in that sense. This is another one of those examples where human beings produce conventions, and they are not simply unnatural. You can make arguments for why it is functional for human beings to form into families, and why marriage is an important entity to define, and how the family is a basic unit of social organization, and how the distinction between illegitimate and legitimate is key to the functioning of a human society, and in that sense natural. So Lear's mistakes here, I mean, you can see them in the way he's now identifying with Edmund's position, and when we see what that position has led to. The absolute dissolution of society at the middle of the play, when a bastard son proves to be a bastard by turning against his father. More of Lear's vision and its limited character here, line 20. Behold yon simpering dame, whose faith between her forks presages snow, that minces virtue and does shake the head to hear of pleasure's name. Thou fit you, nor the soiled horse goes to it with a more riotous appetite. Down from the waist they are centaurs, though women all above, but to the girdle do the gods inherit. Beneath is all the fiends. Now this is to reduce women to their sexual organs. And it is not the complete picture of humans, and especially of women, in this play. Lear is forgetting Cordelia here. There is a woman who transcends this. I'm just trying to show you, not that this is presented as simply untrue, but Shakespeare does present it as just one side of the picture of human nature. Again, this is the truth that Shakespeare touches upon in his plays about love. We are animals. We do have these sexual impulses that we share with the animals, and we can't neglect that. But we cannot be obsessed with that either. We cannot focus only on that when there are Cordelias in the world as well. Lear cannot come up with an integrated image of humanity that it would account for both Goneril and Regan on one hand and Cordelia on the other. The political consequences of this continue, page 116, Act 4, Scene 6, about line 155. And here we see how Lear has now totally abandoned justice. Line 153, look with thine eyes, see how yon justice rails upon yon simple thief. Hark, in thy ear change places and handy-dandy, which is the dust justice, which is the thief. Now, again, there's a lot of truth to that, and Shakespeare was very aware of it. How many crooks end up as justices? But if you pursue this to a universal principle, you will have undermined all principles of human justice. Thou hast seen a farmer, as thou hast seen a farmer's dog bark at a beggar, aye, sir, and the creature run from the cur. There thou mightst behold the great image of authority, a dog's obeyed in office. Thou rascal beetle, hold thy bloody hand. Why dost thou lash that whore? Strip thine own back, thou hotly lust's user in that kind for which thou whips her. Again, this is so powerful. And you can see Shakespeare's indignation at the injustices in the world, and how many people who exercise authority are worse than the people they attempt to punish. But the consequences of it would be to undermine all political life. As Lear goes on, top of page 117, line 165, the usurer hangs the cozener, through tattered clothes small vices do appear, robes and furrowed gowns hide all. There it is again, the clothing imagery. Lear sees it as totally artificial. It's just covering over the sins of people in authority. They're dressed up to look good, but they're evil on the inside. Played sin with gold, and the strong lance of justice hurtless breaks. Armored in rags, a pygmy's straw does pierce it. And again, this is one of the profound truths that Lear has learned, the injustice of his own regime. That's why he came to question the gods, why he says he will show the heavens more just. But the consequence is, line 170, none does offend, none. I say none. And is that really true? Does Cornwall offend? Does Goneril offend? Does Regan offend? Does Edmund offend? Lear was deeply offended by these people early in the play, and he was right to be offended by them. They were deeply unjust and evil, and someone like Lear has to stand up to them. If he concludes that nobody offends, then who's going to be there to protect us from the Gonerils and Regans and Cornwalls and Edmonds in the world? So we see here, if you will, the cognitive defect of his madness. And this is indeed madness. These are the ramblings of a madman in this scene. As in Plato's Republic, when the philosopher who has seen the idea of the good comes back into the cave, he seems mad to the ordinary people in the cave, in the city, and indeed Lear does to here. There's deep philosophical truths in this madness. Lear has come to question convention, but at a terrible price in political terms. He has disqualified himself to rule because he no longer thinks there's any difference between justice and injustice in the world. Now, when you turn to the next scene, there's a total transformation, scene 7. Turn to page 125. Here, Lear has entered a spiritual world, and it's one of the most beautiful scenes Shakespeare ever wrote. The poetry is truly transcendent here, and we see Lear rise above all the anguish of his world and all the tragedy of his world to achieve this one beautiful moment of communion with Cordelia. Act 4, scene 7, line 45. You do me wrong to take me out of the grave. Thou art a soul in bliss, but I am bound upon a wheel of fire that mine own tears do scald like molten lead. If Shakespeare had written nothing but those 4 lines, he would be the greatest poet who ever lived. It don't get no better than that. Sir, do you know me? You are a spirit, I know. Where did you die? And this is our indication that he's moved beyond this world into the spirit. Still far wide, scarce awake, let him alone. Where have I been? Where am I? Fair daylight, I am mightily abused. I should e'en die with pity to see another thus. I know not what to say. I will not swear these are my hands. Let's see, I feel this pinprick. So there it is. He has to remind himself he has a body here. He has to see that his body still can feel a pinprick. He feels his past beyond it. Oh, look upon me, sir, and hold your hand in benediction over me. You must not kneel. And you have to realize here that Lear has kneeled down to Cordelia. And here we have a total reversal. In the opening of the play, Lear expected everyone to kneel down to him, and he wanted his daughters, above all, to kneel down him and verbally kiss his feet. And now he's reversed that, and we see here that this reversal is necessary to bring these two human beings together. What has stood in their way up to now has been this political barrier that he is the king and she is a princess, much like the tension we saw between Prince Hal and King Henry, that they never could speak, even as father and son, because they were king and prince. that added so much of an extra problem to their communication. Here, even the relationship between father and daughter is surpassed. It's an attempt to achieve a spiritual equality here. Lear will kneel to his daughter. The king will kneel to the princess. The father will kneel to the daughter. Lines 58, pray do not mock me. I am a very foolish, fond old man, 80 upward, not an hour more nor less. And to deal plainly, I fear I am not in my perfect mind. Methinks I should know you, and know this man, yet I am doubtful. For I am mainly ignorant what place this is, and all the skill I have remembers not these garments. There it is, the garments again. So much of this play can be incorporated in just the images of Lear. He appears in his royal robes at the beginning. He's reduced to rags and nakedness at the middle. Now, this is traditionally actors. They put a white gown on him, almost like a hospital gown, and it shows the march back into civilization here. Do not laugh at me, for as I am a man, I think this lady to be my child Cordelia. And so I am. Be your tears wet, yet faith, I pray, weep not. If you have poison for me, I will drink it. I know you do not love me, for your sisters have, as I do remember, done me wrong. You have some cause, they have not. And then Cordelia lies. No cause. She has plenty of cause. But she too has learned a lesson here of when it's time to be diplomatically untruthful. Am I in France? Lear intelligently asks, knowing some background here, and Kent says, in your own kingdom, sir. It's a very powerful moment. Kent, who is so loyal to Lear, who sees him having authority in his face, he wants his old king back. But he can't have him. Do not abuse me. The doctor says, be comforted, good madam. The great rage you see is killed in him. And that's fine. It's a great relief that the great rage is killed in him. But the great rage is what made him king. That's his noble anger. That's what made people obey him. They were scared of this guy because of the great rage. This guy invokes the gods on you to make you sterile. This guy invokes lightnings to pierce your skin. You listen to this guy. You jump when he says it. Nobody's going to jump anymore at this figure. Line 85, I am old and foolish. No king can get up in front of a court and say I'm old and foolish and expect people to obey him. Now, this is in some ways the heart of Shakespeare's tragic vision of politics here, that this is a tremendous scene for Lear. It's the culmination of so many truths he's learned about his own limitations, about the mistakes he made, but it does unfit him for kingship. For one thing, he cannot integrate his vision. Again, as I said, he can't have an idea of humanity that encompasses both Goneril, Regan, and Cordelia. He's got that all-or-nothing attitude that Shakespeare always calls into question. Scene 6, we're beasts. Scene 7, we're spirits. But also, the thumos is gone. The thumos stood in the way of his learning the truth about himself. He was too proud, too indignant to accept the truths about himself. In some ways, that pride had to be stripped of him. He had to be humiliated so he'd be open to those truths. But the result is a great loss in grandeur. Got in trouble on my Harvard senior thesis because I said something about how Lear had to trade grandeur for truth, and comments, oh no, this is his grandest moment. It's only grand in a kind of modern redefinition of grandeur. This is a moment of weakness on Lear's part. I am old and foolish. In political terms, this disqualifies him from rule. There's a nice note in your edition on Laurence Olivier's King Lear. This is on page 260 if you got the signet. I didn't recommend this Olivier's film of Lear for just this reason. It's the second paragraph on 260. What of Olivier's depiction of Lear? Perhaps one could say fairly that this television performance is touching rather than harrowing. Olivier had undergone a decade of severe illness, gout, cancer of the prostate, thrombosis of the leg, and a deteriorating muscular disease, and apparently lacked the strength that the role requires. There is much in the performance that is admirable, but on the whole, this Lear lacks tragic stature. To use Aristotle's terms, Olivier evokes pity, but not terror. Now, Olivier is fabulous in just this scene, Act 4, Scene 7, where his physical weakness as an actor is his great strength in playing the scene. I invoke this guy's criticism of Lear just because I think it tells us something about Lear, that we can speak of how at this moment, Act 4, Scene 7, Lear now evokes pity but not terror, and therefore lacks tragic stature. Again, we have such a hard time coming to terms with what Shakespearean tragedy tries to tell us. We would like to think you can be a great ruler and a magnificent king and also be a sweet old man who loves his daughter and knows the truth about his weakness. It would be a nice world if that's the way things worked out. But I think what Shakespeare is showing us here is no, it's a much tougher world than that. That Lear is paying a terrible price for everything he's learned, and above all for the reduction of his soul that made this possible. And I think that's reinforced the next time we see Lear and Cordelia together, which is at the beginning of Act 5, Scene 3, so page 131. This is another beautiful speech here. Just astounding how Shakespeare keeps coming up with this. He wrote this play at the height of his power. So bottom of page 131, Act 5, Scene 3, about line 8, when Cordelia says, let's face her sisters, no, 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 no. Come, let's away to prison. We two alone will sing like birds in the cage. Where thou dost ask me blessing, I'll kneel down and ask of thee forgiveness. So we'll live and pray and sing and tell old tales and laugh at gilded butterflies and hear poor rogues talk of court news. And we'll talk with them too, who loses and who wins, who's in, who's out, and take upon us the mystery of things as if we were God's spies. And we'll wear out in a walled prison packs and sects of great ones that ebb and flow by the moon. Again, you couldn't have a more beautiful speech, and it's a moment we wish for, that Lear and Cordelia, having discovered their true love, could now have some time together to experience it and enjoy it. Again, as we see in the first scene, as king and princess, as father and daughter, they could not express their emotions directly. There was too much pressure on them, too many political considerations. Now, when they've lost everything, they can speak the truth about their love. But look at the consequences. Come, let's away to prison. The great King Lear, with his great rage, would not abide that his servant was put in the stocks, as happened with Kent in Act 2. To Lear, that was an indignity to him as a king, to see one of his servants placed in the stocks. Now he willingly embraces prison. He's allowing himself to be in prison. We two alone will sing like birds in the cage. It's a beautiful image, but he's reduced to a pet animal here, to a domesticated animal, a bird in a cage, and it ain't even gilded. When thou dost ask me blessing, I'll kneel down and ask of thee forgiveness. And again, this beautiful transcending of their conventional roles that actually inhibited their expressions of love for each other. So we'll live and pray and sing and tell tales and laugh at gilded butterflies. And hear poor rogues talk of court news, and we'll talk with them too, who loses and who wins, who's in, who's out. That's what politics is reduced to at this point for Lear. Mere gossip, who loses and who wins, who's in, who's out. Now, it makes a lot of difference who's in, who's out. It makes a lot of difference whether Goneril and Regan and Cornwall and Edmund are in and Albany and Edgar and Kent are out. But Lear here is indifferent to it. Now, again, there's something to be said about his transcending the limits of politics here and no longer caring about all those petty things like justice and who runs the kingdom. And notice the detachment here. It's a kind of philosophical detachment. We'll take upon us the mystery of things if we're God's spies. But his hope is we'll wear out in a walled prison, Pax and Sex of the great ones. And when he finishes his speech, Edmund says, "Take them away." And you realize who's in charge here now. It's not King Lear in charge. It's Edmund in charge. And when people like Edmund are in charge, we're in trouble. And indeed, Lear and Cordelia will die because of that order. And again, I don't want to minimize, indeed I want to maximize the beauty of this moment between Lear and Cordelia, only so you will see how fragile it is. That contrary to what Lear claims, this isn't going to go on forever. It's virtually over by the time he finishes the speech because of who's in. And it's Edmund, and Edmund's in charge. And indeed, as we see in Act 5, for a resolution of this play, Edmund's got to be out and Edgar's got to be in. You have to get rid of these people, and it's not going to be done by sweet speeches between an old man and his daughter. It's going to be done on the battlefield. Edgar must champion justice on the battlefield to restore the right order to the kingdom. And indeed, in the grand shape of this play, as we've been seeing from the beginning, it begins in order. The center of the play is disorder. There's a restoration of order in the fifth act, and that restoration of order requires arms. And in particular, a ritual combat. And it is interesting that we're back to where we started this course, the very first scene of Richard II. If you turn to page 136, so Act 5, Scene 3, about 111, a trumpet sounds. Herald reads, "If any man of quality or degree within the list of the army will maintain upon Edmund, supposed Earl of Gloucester, that he is a manifold traitor, let him appear by the third sound of the trumpet. He is bold in his defense." And then we get the trumpet sounding. And remember this from Richard II with Mowbray and Bolingbroke. Very interesting that Shakespeare creates this scene. He could have had Edmund just killed. He could defeat his army and then just hack off his head. We could have had a kind of Hotspur Prince Hal scene on the battlefield. Edgar fighting it out with Edmund. But Shakespeare wants this ritual combat because I think he wants ritual here. He wants to show that the restoration of order requires the restoration of ritual. The first scene of the play, the very opening, is very ritualistic in this court, and it has all the trappings of the court. All that disappears by the middle of the play. It must recur in the last act. Part of the reestablishing of the political community is a reestablishing of ritual. And even page 138, you'll see Act 5, Scene 3, line 147. I might well delay by rule of knighthood. And suddenly rule of knighthood comes back into the play. And remember the theory behind ritual combat. It was that in Richard II, that God would not support a traitor in battle. And it's somewhat similar here as part of the restoration of faith in the gods and in their justice, as part of the restoration of the faith in political order. Things must happen by a ritual combat here. In a way, it reflects people's restored faith that the gods will support a just outcome here when Edgar meets Edmund. But above all, it's a reminder of the military foundation of any regime. It took a battle to recapture justice in this play. You can say that Lear's fundamental mistake at the beginning was to forget about the importance of the military. that he could turn his armies over to Albany and Cornwall and still be king. Now you can see why he might think that at age 80. For all we know, his kingdom has been at peace for 60 years. And everybody scared to death of this guy and his noble anger. And they haven't dared to stand up to him. But the minute he gives the sword away, then everything gets reversed in the play, as the fool keeps trying to point out to him. And so similarly here, it's very important that this battle be fought to reestablish the regime, and it should come down to this moment of ritual combat to remind us that whatever else you say about a political regime, it needs a foundation in force, because it's going to deal with evil that must be suppressed. Now, this is not an assertion that might makes right, because that principle has actually failed in the play. It's the principle represented by Cornwall and Regan in their trial of Gloucester, for example. And there's a peasant revolt. The people stand up against it. It's not that might makes right, but it is that right needs might to establish itself. That right without might isn't much in the political realm. So it's very important that Shakespeare stages this impressive scene between Edgar and Edmund as a ritual combat. And then we get the ending of the play on page 143, where Lear does enter with the dead Cordelia. And this, too, is an important reminder of the principle of might in politics. Lear, at the center of the play, as we've seen, has rejected politics. He's questioned justice. He's even questioned the difference between human beings and animals. But now he's reminded of Cordelia. I began this whole analysis of Lear on page 144, Act 5, Scene 3, again, line 306, where Lear says, "And my poor fool is hanged. No, no, no life. Why should a dog or horse or rat have life, and thou no breath at all?" Lear recaptures a sense of the difference between human beings and animals at the end of the play. He now sees the difference between Cordelia and some mere animal. This is the difference that he denies in Act 4, Scene 6, when he's forgetting about Cordelia and is obsessively dwelling on Goneril and Regan. It's very important, again, for those people who think that Act 3, Scene 4 is man no more than this, that's the truth of King Lear as a whole. They're forgetting about this last moment. And as a response to that perception, Lear returns to the kingship for one grand moment at the end of the play. This is on page 143. Line 276, a plague upon you murderers, traitors all. Line 276, I killed the slave that was a hanging thee. And he did it. 'Tis true, my lords, he did. This feeble, 80-year-old, fond and foolish old man still had it in him to kill the man that killed Cordelia. And he sees him as a slave. And then in a marvelous Shakespearean moment, "Did I not, fellow? I have seen the day with my good biting falchion. I would have made them skip. I am old now, and these same crosses spoil me." Lear goes back to his youth. It is such a brilliant moment, psychological moment on Shakespeare's part. Here, at the very verge of his life, Lear says, "I have seen the day with my good biting falchion. I have made them skip." And we get this brief glimpse of what made Lear king in the beginning, that he made them skip with his sword. And again, the sword is not enough. It does not make a complete human being, but without it, the Cordelias of the world are, alas, all too liable to be killed. So Lear remembers his youth here. He dies committing an act of justice, and specifically an act of punishment, what he renounced in effect in Act 4, Scene 6, when he was going to let people go for adultery, and he wasn't going to punish anybody anymore. Kill Cordelia, and he realizes why there's a need for the King Lears of this world. So we see this very powerful moment in Shakespeare reminding us of the need for politics. So much of this play shows us the limits of politics, the defects of politics, and yet what makes life tragic is we still need it. For all its problematic aspects, the only thing standing between us and the Gonerills and Regans and Edmonds and Cornwalls of the world are people like King Lear, who were willing to stand up and make people skip with their falchion. And so a tremendous ending to the play, and we're left really in a pool of tears at the end of this play. I can barely read it, let alone sit through a production of it. And we do see a reconstitution of order here at the end of the play. We see who will rule. But it's tough because people don't want to rule anymore. Very interesting development. Albany, who's the highest ranking person left standing, says on page 144, line 300, "For us, we will resign during the life of this old majesty to him our absolute power." So imagine what an Edmund or a Cornwall would do at this point, just exult in taking over. Albany's first move is a move of resignation. We're going to let Lear rule. And then when he dies, this is now page 145, so line 320, Albany says, "Our present business is general woe. Friends of my soul, you twain rule in this realm, and the gored state sustain." Much of this play has been a scramble for power. People fighting to get the throne. And above all, the villainous characters. The ending is just the reverse. People trying to renounce the throne. I resign. No, you resign. And this is an important lesson here that these people have learned, that power isn't what it's cracked up to be. And indeed, in Plato's Republic, and even more so in Sir Thomas More's Utopia, the best qualification for ruling is a disinclination to rule. Thomas More has in that Utopia said something, the best way you know who you want to rule you is the people who don't want to do it. That would be a nice qualification for American politics, I might add. And we see it here. This is a very sobered group of rulers left at the end who really now have developed a distaste for politics and presumably will be better rulers for it. They will not be grabbing for everything the way the villains in the play do. And then the last lines of the play, spoken by Edgar, the weight of this sad time we must obey. "Speak what we feel, not what we ought to say. The oldest hath borne most. We that are young shall never see so much, nor live so long." And we see here a reversal of everything the play began with. Speak what we feel, not what we ought to say. The whole problem in the court, as we've been seeing all along since the history plays, and including As You Like It, is that in the court we speak what we ought to say, not what we feel. And people can't express their feelings, and that's the problem in the opening scene. It's what Cordelia's complaining about, that people in court speak what they ought to say, not what they feel. And the oldest hath borne most. We that are young shall never see so much, nor live so long. Here's the sense that who's ever left is diminished. You get a real feel for the Shakespearean tragic ending here, that order has been reconstituted, but on a much lower level. Fortunately, we can say that it is both what's best and what's worst in humanity that has been purged by the end of the play. Yes, Goneril, Regan, Cornwall, and Edmund are gone, but Lear is gone, Cordelia is gone, Fool is gone, Kent is more or less saying he's going to kill himself. This is a good example of what reconstitution of order at the end of a tragedy as opposed to a comedy is. That is, in Shakespearean comedy, there's something very positive about the restoration of order at the end of the play. We feel it is inclusive, and it brings everybody together, and it brings them together in marriages that look to the future and promise fertility and generation, and in that sense, the continuation of the political community. Yes, we may lose a Jacques here and a Malvolio there, but good riddance to them. They're killjoys anyway. But Shakespeare does that even in the comedies to remind us that inclusive, even in comedy, isn't all-inclusive. But here in the tragedy, the sense of loss is tremendous at the end. Much as we saw in Romeo and Juliet, that yes, Verona comes together, but we've lost Romeo and Juliet and Mercutio and Tybalt, lost almost all the youth of the city, all the promise of the future there. Here, these remaining characters, they are shell-shocked. It's almost post-traumatic stress syndrome here, and legitimately after what they've been through. So this is what it means in a tragedy. You reconstitute order, but on a much lower level. The greatest figures have been purged from the community. And it's a good reminder that in some ways, the political community for Shakespeare is the middle. It's where people meet at the middle. It's where they compromise. It's where, in some ways, they have to give up their greatest hopes and aspirations, but in which they can avoid their greatest fears and nightmares. And again, you lose the evil characters, the monsters of the deep, but you also lose King Lear and Cordelia as well, and that's why it's tragic. Okay, I've left myself enough time to say something to sum this all up in terms of clothing. I've been wanting to, I'm an English professor, I should say more about imagery in this course. And it is amazing how Shakespeare organizes this play around the imagery of clothing. And let me run through that to sum up what I've been saying about nature and convention in the play. So I've been saying clothing is a marvelous example of all this complexity of nature and convention as Shakespeare presents it. Again, we start off with this simple notion that there's nature and there's convention, and they're complete opposites. And we can see that, we look at animals in nature. They grow their own clothing. It's their skin, it's their feathers, it's their fur. A polar bear doesn't go into a store and say, show me something in a white. And a porcupine doesn't go into a store and say, what's the latest you got in quills? No, they just grow these things. And it's natural to them. Now, notice that means that they're kind of restricted, that you don't see too many polar bears in Miami Beach because they can't just take off the coat. And so human beings are these strange creatures that make their clothing. Our clothing doesn't just grow on us. And at first, we want to say about clothing that it's unnatural. It's so artificial, and so much of it is ridiculous and artificial. And Lear makes that point. I keep coming back to this speech on page 65 about clothing, Act 2, Scene 4, line 266, when he says to Goneril and Regan, "Thou art a lady, if only to go warm or gorgeous, why nature needs not what thou gorgeous wears, which scarcely keeps thee warm." That's so packed there. But what he's saying, this strange thing about clothing, that you would think we wear clothing to keep us warm. That's the function of clothing. We would like to say that's when clothing is natural, when it performs its function of keeping us warm. But in fact, people wear clothing that makes them look gorgeous, even though it scarcely keeps them warm. Clothing often doesn't seem to follow its sheer functional purpose. It's a way of expressing ourselves, of showing how good we are by wearing this beautiful clothing. And so in northern England, you'd wear silk instead of heavy furs, just to show how gorgeous you are. And Lear understands that there's something crazy about that, and even artificial about it. And yet, it's our way of showing man's life is not as cheap as beasts, as he says in that speech. That clothing is a way in which we fulfill ourselves, and people have whole careers in the area. And it's the incredible thing about human beings, this strange thing, we're these beings whose nature it is to create conventions. This comes up later in the play on page 113, when Lear clothes himself in flowers. This is page 113, Act 4, Scene 6, about line 80. When he enter Lear fantastically dressed with wild flowers. He's not now accepting his nakedness. He's dressed himself up in flowers. And then, this is a little hard to follow maybe, and I think some producers miss it as well. This is line 84. No, Lear says, no, they cannot touch me for coining. I am the king himself. Oh, thou side piercing spite. Nature's above art in that respect. There's your press money. Lear starts handing out the flowers as money. There's your press money, the money for serving in my army. And his point about this is he's the king. They cannot touch me for coining. I'm the king himself. He's like a Renaissance head of the Federal Reserve. Helicopter Lear. A 16th century Ben Bernanke. He can just create money out of nothing here because he's the king. And if he says it's money, it's money. And nature's above art in that respect. It's really a fascinating moment where, again, this strange thing about human nature, that we can just create things by our will. Now, I'm going to read you a passage from a later work of Shakespeare's, The Winter's Tale, which is also about nature and art, and helps to make the point I've been trying to make here. This is a scene, a pastoral scene among shepherds and shepherdesses, and they're talking about horticulture, and specifically about grafting, how you can make a better plant by grafting. And one of the characters says, yet nature is made better by no mean, but nature makes that mean. So over that art which you say adds to nature is an art that nature makes. This is an art which does mend nature, change it rather, but the art itself is nature. This is maybe the most philosophical passage in all of Shakespeare there, and I offered, so you see, he really does think about these issues. What he's saying there is we human beings are part of nature. And so what we do is natural. Now, bees make honey and create hives and have societies, and we think that's all natural because it's what bees do, but because they do it by instinct. We human beings are strange because we do things. We create hives, we create cities, we create things like honey, and we make clothing and so on. But we are part of nature. So why isn't that natural? This is an art which does mend nature, but the art itself is nature. I want you to see that when he reflects on this, Shakespeare does offer the idea that there isn't a simple opposition between nature and convention, that in fact our conventions are natural in the sense we're that peculiar animal that is not given everything by instinct. And it's part of our natures that we create things here, and it may be creating new plants that have never been seen in nature before, or it may be creating our cities or creating our clothing. That's why in this play, so much of the counteraction once society has been dissolved is the act of restoring clothing, so that as we see civilization dissolving as we watch clothing coming off. So page 77, when this is Act 3, Scene 4, about line 65, when Tom appears naked on the stage, quite a moment, and Lear thinks it's his daughters that brought him to this pass. He says, wouldst thou give them all? And the fool, this is Act 3, Scene 4, line 65, says, nay, he reserved a blanket, else we had been all shaved. So presumably Tom at least still has a blanket covering his loins. Now this is a marvelous moment when you think about it, because a theatrical convention runs up against this larger political convention here. There was no, to my knowledge, full frontal nudity on the Elizabethan stage. So they couldn't have Tom come out totally naked. So as the fool points out, they had to put a blanket on him. Today, of course, they have full frontal nudity everywhere. And so you see this stuff all the time. Now, as we've seen, Lear then begins to undress in Act 4, Act 3, Scene 4. But this is the turning point comes in Act 3, Scene 6, when Lear starts to recover the need for clothing. Act 3, Scene 6. He's constituting a court here. No oaths, but robes. This is Act 3, Scene 6, about line 35. It's on page 85. Bring in their evidence, and to Edgar he says, thou robed man of justice, take thy place. Even in his madness, he realizes, if we're going to have a society, we need clothing. And so, as I pointed out last time, page 87, the reversal of the movement occurs in Act 3, Scene 6 here, line 79. He takes Tom for his 100 nights. Only I do not like the fashionary garments. You will say they are Persian, but let them be changed. And from then on, we see a lot of changes of garments in this play as the world is reconstituted in social terms. Page 97, Act 4, Scene 1, about line 44. Gloucester, thinking of his walk to Dover, says, and bring some covering for this naked soul. Indeed, as we start to move back into society out of the depths of the center of this play, we need some covering for the naked soul. Page 110. Gloucester notices the difference in Edgar's voice. This is Act 4, Scene 6, line 8. You are much deceived. In nothing I might change, but in my garments. Again, I'm trying to show you how thematic this is in the play, the change of garments. Page 123. This is Act 4, Scene 7. Cordelia says this to Kent, 4, Scene 7, line 6. Be better suited. These weeds are memories of those worser hours. He wants me to dress better. It's marvelous that be better suited. If you don't put a new suit on, you won't be suited, fit for this new society. 124 at the top, Act 4, Scene 7, about line 20. I, madam, in the heaviness of sleep, we put fresh garments on him, said of Lear. And then we saw he couldn't recognize the garments there. So, again, the whole sweep of the play is encapsulated in the fact that we begin with everyone dressed up in the ritual, ceremonial aspect of the court, everybody looking the part. It's in the nature of the play that everyone gets stripped of that clothing. We end up with naked wretches at the center of the play. And that is the sense of recognizing how artificial conventions can be. But the play does not leave us naked, and it doesn't leave the characters naked. The counter movement in the play is a reconstitution of society, and that takes the form of a reconstitution of clothing. People have to put the garments back on. But they're fresh garments. That's the hope. We may never attain to the state, of the regal state that Lear begins with. But by the end of the play, Edgar, for example, who's ended up naked in the middle of the play, is back looking like a knight and dressed to kill, as we say, and ready to assume authority here. So again, this play is a great investigation of the tension between nature and convention. It does recognize Shakespeare's understanding of how false and artificial conventions can be, but he does see that it's in human nature to live in a world of conventions, that the community itself is a kind of convention created by human beings, and to think that we can simply dispense with conventions. That's the view of men like Edmund, that there's no difference between legitimate and illegitimate. It's the view of Lear in his Madness in Act 4, Scene 6. I don't think it's the wisdom of the play as a whole and its real profundity, and what I think groups Shakespeare in this regard with Plato and Aristotle against modern thinkers like Hobbes and Rousseau, that he thinks of human beings as fulfilled in the community and therefore fulfilled in their building of conventions. His hope is that we won't let our conventions get totally out of touch with nature, as he feels happens in, say, Petrarchan love poetry, but that we will learn to reconstitute our conventions in some way so that brings them closer to nature. Okay, we finished King Lear. We'll move on to The Tempest and see how many of these same ideas play out there.